Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Stemmy Conversations. I'm your host, Bradley Downer, and alongside me are my co-hosts, Miss Kennedy Roberts and Miss Stephanie Simon. Today we're having a guest, Mr. Jelani Payne from Barbados. Mr. Payne is an engineer, an educator, a writer. He's also a published author of the book Survive, Thrive, and Stay in College. He's a public speaker. He's the founder and senior instructor of Robot Adventures, and is also the program manager of the Caribbean Science Foundation. Mr. Payne, welcome to Stomach Conversations. All right, Mr. Payne. So the first question is, you're an engineer. Can you describe a day in your life as an engineer?
Sure. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to the Stemmy podcast. I appreciate it. We would have met a little while ago, you and I, Bradley, on LinkedIn, and then we would have connected and so on. Um, you know, within recent years and so on. All right. So in terms of a career, or rather, I should say, in terms of a day in life, career engineer. The day isn't necessarily always hard, and the day can be spent either in the field or it can be in the office. It really depends on what type of work is required. So, for example, when I worked more so in the field, right, you'd find that a lot of the work was mostly just doing a lot of maintenance checks, right? You have to be consistent with the maintenance of equipment and so on. So your day would start with checking the maintenance that was done the previous day. Really, was it done? What is still left to be done? And because you're trying to prevent downtime. Downtime meaning you're trying to prevent a situation where the plant, the equipment, the machine, it stops working, right? Or has a problem, right? Because then that stops production, that actually stops your ability to create income with that machine or that equipment, etc. Right? So that's how the day would start. And throughout the day, then you find tasks would then move on to actually operating the machine. So in the case of a manufacturing plant, for example, making product, whatever that is, it can be an agro-processing plant, it can be in the case of a marine vessel or submersible, it could be so many different things, right? So you're into the operations, and then by the end of the day, you're kind of winding down generally in terms of reports, right? Reporting on what would have happened for the day and what needs to happen for the next day. Now, don't think that what I'm saying is, necessarily a typical day. Typical days vary a lot. It just depends on what happened. There can be stoppage for any number of reasons, right? It could be a bad batch of a product. It could be a case where whether you might have maintained the machinery or not, there is downtime, right? Maybe a part is worn out. Whether or not you would have tried to maintain it, try to be preventative in your maintenance. And then you find sometimes a day can be spent inside where you're more so just focused on basically ensuring that all the maintenance was done. So you might just be checking to see, checking a list, just looking at a checklist, what was done, what wasn't done, connecting with persons in terms of equipment. Do we need new equipment? Do we need someone to come out and verify that everything is working correctly, etc. And allocating personnel as necessary, in terms of technicians to keep everything running smoothly. Yeah, that's kind of what a day in a life. Specifically for me, it's very different now because I'm not in the field anymore. Much of my work is in front of the computer, lots of preparation in terms of teaching, because now I teach robotics and coding. So a lot of my work is mostly, I would say, maybe 80% preparation, maybe about 20% execution. So for example, like you saw the Caribbean STEM Olympiads, that was just one day, right? Well, sorry, rather 3 days. But when I say one day in terms of the Math Olympiad, one very long day. But we would have prepared significantly for that, from the Jeopardy software to questions, to conceptualizing the event, right? And then marketing and so on. So yeah, but something to keep in mind, an engineer, very different from a technician, tends not to focus only on the technical. They have to look at the overall system. They have to. So even though we might not be in the C-suite working as a CEO, we're still managers. We still have to think of everything. And then we have to go to the actual managers sometimes and say, well, hey, you need to do this. If not, this either could cost you a lot more money, or it could result in stoppage, etc.
Okay, thank you so much for explaining the transitioning from the engineer perspective. It's really cool because I was wondering like which branch you were in actually. So thank you so much for that. The question that I would like to ask is, how is STEM or ICT being integrated into your field of work?
So right now, I spend a lot of time teaching, lecturing, coaching persons in coding robotics from ages 5 years old, early childhood, all the way up to teachers and so on, right? And then you have the general mass public who's interested in it as well, right? Even more mature persons. So coding and robotics inherently is STEM-based, technology-based, but what you find is now persons are very dedicated to robotics and coding at the educational level. Before it was more commercial, but now we're talking a lot more educational, right? So that's where you find ICT is implemented in that educational sector a lot, and that's where I'm implementing it. So when I started, I would have just been doing an extracurricular program at one school, and then I built on my knowledge because I said, okay, this is definitely going to trend and become larger, become more widespread. It is done so already overseas, North America, South America, etc. Right? It's acknowledged as a trending area, as an important area. For example, ChatGPT, right? OpenAI, right? And how schools already have to ban it because they're using it, to write essays for themselves and so on and stuff like that, right? Etc. Of course, used in many other creative areas, but you find that ICT and that type of technology or that area is being implemented from, for example, when I go into lecture at Urbanstown Teachers Training College, the smart board there, right? They have some smart boards, something as simple as that, which makes it easier to identify content, to show persons different perspectives, right? To enhance the teaching modality, right? Or rather, I should say, enhance the modality for students as well. Because now, as a teacher, I can, write over my notes, my presentation slides, but then also students can see, even better visuals, right? And they can engage with the content a bit differently. So smart boards, for example, in the actual robots, right? I would have invested heavily in a lot of my equipment. And so that's one of the areas that it's really being implemented in my work, educational robots, not just the robots themselves, but the pedagogy, how you teach this content, right? And that's what I specialize in. That's why I endeavored to teach across various age levels, because I wanted to know, okay, how do you take these complex concepts and teach it to persons who do not have my background? Because most persons do not have my background at all, right? Teachers definitely don't. Some do, but not all. And so, for example, for them, they can, it's easy enough to buy equipment somewhat, not necessarily the Caribbean, but you can buy it. But then there's a difference between buying it, knowing how to use it, that specific platform, and then being able to teach the concepts of robotics with that platform, right? Very, very different stuff. And then even more different across the varied age levels. So you have your robotics equipment, but then the software, the coding software. And oh gosh, so for example, in the recent Caribbean STEM Olympiads hosted by the Caribbean Science Foundation, we were using a Jeopardy software, and they had something called the latex editor, where you can write in the equations, the math equations. So rather than writing a fraction using the slash on your keyboard, you use this latex editor, and it comes out very uniform, looking like what you might see on a CXC examination or something like that. Comes out looking very professional. So we're using technology, as it relates to ICT in all of those areas, as many as we can, and then everyone else has to catch up, because then you have to teach that to them as well, in addition to the content that they also want to teach.
Yeah, that is.
Okay, so it's good to know. Go ahead.
No,
Stemmy.
you could go ahead, Kenny. It's fine. It's fine.
Okay. So it's good to know that, you're directly molding the minds in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I was a bit curious to know, what are some of the programs that you guys work with?
So when you say programs, are you talking in terms of schools? Are we talking programs run by other organizations, or just me personally?
Oh,
Or overall?
programs in terms of like the actual software that you would work with, or is there software involved? Like there's Scratch. No, we use Scratch over here.
Right.
So just curious to know some of the programs that the children would work with.
Sure. So in this answer, I've used a lot, but that's because I've spent a lot of time into this, like the last half decade plus of my life. All right, so let's go by age level, because it is that serious. It really is. Okay, so you have Scratch Junior. That's one that I am about to teach in a coding club that I run, right, called Robot Adventures, which I run on Saturdays here in Barbados. And Scratch Junior is more for early childhood, 5 to 7 years old, right? So that is different from Scratch, right? Full Scratch. Scratch Junior has significantly less features, but it's tailored to that 5 to 7 year old. Then you have Scratch. Scratch now is like 8 to 11. So that's what I would call my juniors, right? 5 to 7 I would call my infants. 8 to 11 I would call my juniors. And Scratch and Scratch Junior are beginner software. I don't think that beginners means that it isn't useful. It's extremely valuable. I actually have a joke to tell you about this, and I hope I remember. Scratch, interestingly enough, is a very, very powerful set of software. If people only knew how powerful. So you can use Scratch to do artificial intelligence, computer vision. You can use Scratch to control drones. You can use Scratch with, let's say, integrated Bluetooth, or not Bluetooth, a USB controller, right? You can use Scratch in terms of animations, creating dialogues, creating games. And those games can be very, very complex or very, very simple, right? Then you have, and this is just coding. Then you have that, like the seniors level. When I say seniors, I'm talking like my 12 years old and up, right? So that would include teachers, adults, etc. And you have text-based languages, but they can do Scratch too, right? They usually start out there, but they can do Scratch too. So you have Python, you have C, you have C++, you have C#, you have, I'm sure I'm forgetting something somewhere, can't remember now, but yeah, there's so many, right? Even from the same Olympiads, you had them talking about TypeScript and JavaScript and so on and stuff like that. You have, there's so many, and that's just coding. I joke about that because I I learned coding. I didn't learn through Scratch, which is a graphical or a graphical drag and drop blocks type of language. I used, what did I learn on? I can't remember the name. Pascal, right, here we go. That a lot of these C6 students use, the CXE. Pascal is very outdated, but the thing is, because I learned on text, I'm so comfortable with it. Whereas when I learned Scratch, it was actually a little difficult for me because it was like, now I have to adjust from text to this drag in, drop in stuff, right? With text, you know the syntax, but with blocks is a little different, right? Okay, in terms of robotics now software, that varies significantly because you have that's according to the platform. You find most platforms like Robo, One of a Kind, Make Block, and so on. They tend to have Scratch-based versions of the software. Some have purely graphical versions of the software. Where purely graphical meaning it doesn't have any text, so it makes it easy for that early childhood, but roboticists, right? Who you have We Make, right? They have their own kind of Scratch editor too. And when people say Scratch editor, because Vex has that, what they just mean is you're just talking about a drag and drop, a graphical drag and drop programming software, which allows you to which looks like Scratch. That's what. Then at the seniors level, now you have text, Python, you have Arduino, right? Side note, ChatGPT, right? With OpenAI that can actually program an Arduino for you. Funny enough, right? You just have to ask it to program an LED and stuff like that. Very interesting stuff. But then you also have C++ and C and so on, which is used for the same robotics hardware and so on. So there's quite a lot of programs or software that's used. Sometimes it's platform specific. Sometimes it's more general. Oh, and you still have Make Code, which has its own coding software as well.
Okay, thank you for that highlight. I mainly know about Scratch. I've practiced with Scratch and I've taught Scratch, and that was probably the second coding related thing I did, because there's C2nd, I think we did okay, let me not embarrass myself. I can't remember the exact thing, but there's a particular coding that they use in information technology where you actually have to write code, and that code had to be in, in the coding language in order for whatever you wanted to do to work. So I would say that Scratch is my second thing to use, and it was quite easy for me compared to you to catch on to, because it was just, drag and drop. Okay, so my next question to you is, do you have any particular reasons as to why you may have chosen the career path that you have or that you followed?
Yeah, I love adventure. Always. It's so funny. Now, what people call hard airs was just me being an engineer all along. I was just curious. I was just curious. Most people, I I have to be careful how I say this. I guess maybe within the community and so on, sometimes we try to remove that curiosity because we know the evils out there, we know who people are and challenges that are out there. But just being curious and loving adventure. So, for example, I spoke about a day of work. I love the field. I actually have a friend right now, a colleague. He's an electrical engineer. He has a very good job. And he said, Jelani, I spend so much time in the office. And I'm like, what's the problem? To get it paid very highly. but yet inherently I still understood because, he may have that love, whether he acknowledges it or not, he may have that love of adventure being in the field, yet that is more technical. And that's not always where an engineer is going to be, especially as you graduate up the ranks and you build a career, is not necessarily where you're always going to be. But how I got into this, and my background is in mechanical engineering, electronics and computer engineering, and mechatronics engineering. And honestly, if things had worked out even the slightest bit different, I would have been in biomedical engineering because I found that very fascinating, very, very fascinating. So when it comes to engineering, just that love of adventure and having, so let me give you an example. Before I knew what biomedical engineering was, this is how I would have gone into engineering. This is not the origin story, but this is how, for example, I found out that I was really interested in biomedical engineering. I was watching a TV show, Grey's Anatomy, I think it was, and she's smiling, so she probably likes that.
I love Grey's Anatomy.
I love it.
So there was an episode where it was either Grey's Anatomy. Yeah, it was. And I think the person had what they call a butterfly tumor. If I get that wrong, any medical professionals out there, don't sue me. I have no idea about the medical profession, just letting you know. But they call it a butterfly tumor, whatever. And they couldn't reach it with the tools that they had. And so the next step, somebody, one of the doctor's friends thought, hey, can't we just make a tool that can reach around and get to where we wanted to get to? That was interesting. Who does that job? And so began the deep rabbit hole into biomedical engineering. It was all I could talk about for a while. So like I said, adventure and curiosity. I'm always very curious about things. So now the official origin story in engineering, I'm good at teaching, and I've always been told that. But yeah, I was never interested in teaching. I was always interested in things like working on an oil rig, right? For example, but Barbados doesn't have oil rigs, so that's luck for me, right? So then I'm not generally just interested in building buildings. I'm interested in machines. Not only interested in machines, I'm interested in how things work and so on. And a lot of my experience, for example, came around the house that I'm in right now, my parents' home, where I would have installed a lot of the fixtures, lights, fans, fix things, plumbing, etc. I hate plumbing. I absolutely hate plumbing. I don't do it anymore, but stuff like that, fixing the car, anything like that. So a lot of my experience came from there. But in terms of the origin, just that love of adventure, just being interested in that and finding out who did those things that were adventurous in terms of the area of machines and technology, etc., and that intersection.
Okay, well, I was running a bit. Sorry. So the question that I would like to ask you is, what advice would you give to young folks that would want to venture out in this field?
You can get your feet wet by just getting into maybe coming in as a technician, right? It's the fastest path to money. I know that now. Just studying to be an engineer might take a little longer because you have to build experience in the field before you can actually manage others and so on. So I would say that, so I would say that when it comes to the area of engineering, well, firstly, research. Everyone isn't like me. And what I always suggest to my students, and not just mine, even when I speak like at the National Guidance Counselors Association event for students, I always recommend research the areas that you're interested in every day. Engineering is a big field. There's so many parts of engineering, but the only way that you can have an idea of what is out there is if you research what is out there, one. And the only way that you can get a feel for what you like is by testing it, trying it, and seeing what it's really about. And you have to hunt this, literally. I tell them you have to hunt this, right? You can't just say, stay at home and say, well, I think I might be interested in engineering. No. See what an engineer is, see what they do, research it. There's so many YouTube videos, there's so much information. You can find out everything you need. And then I would say you have to pace yourself, because engineering is one of those fields where, for example, you cannot just leave Barbados or Guyana or anywhere and go to another country and say you're practicing engineering. It's like being a doctor, right? It's like being, it's one of those very heavily guided and I can't think of the other word, but it's not protected isn't the word, but it's one of those very specialized areas that, because engineering is different in every country, and each country has different engineering standards, you can't just jump from place to place and practice, right? So, and I've had friends who've left Barbados, who've left other places and gone to practice engineering. You have to go through rigorous examination and training, which to me which absolutely makes no sense. Right, so it is not, because engineering is one of those very specialized fields, like being a doctor or a lawyer, etc. You cannot just jump from country to country practicing it, like maybe, let's say, graphic design or coding, etc. Funny enough, right? So what needs to happen is you have to go through rigorous training. So if I leave Barbados and I go to Canada or anywhere else, there's a new or a different set of standards of engineering that they may have. And so I would need to leave here and, before I leave, I would need to do those exams, which requires some studying, and I would need to, apply to join their engineering association board and so on, and train, or rather I shadow one of the engineers in that country for about a year, usually, so that they can attest that, hey, Jelani understands the standards in Canada and he can apply them correctly and safely. Very important, safety, right? Because we are building things that the humans will use, and whether by proxy or whether directly or indirectly. And so, everything must be up to a safe standard. I would say don't get into it for the money, not because it doesn't have money. There is a lot of money in engineering, but because, one, you have to be able to work in a team, for example. It's not a loner sport. You have to work with other people to bring projects to a conclusion, to put them together, between the architect, the civil engineer, the mechanical engineer, the electrical engineer, et cetera, all working together. I would say also in terms of the money, don't come into it for the money, because you may find, based in comparison to the amount of work that you do, you may not find you are compensated as you would like. Like I said, not because there isn't money in engineering, but because, just like a doctor is almost like a calling. Like if someone says that they're a pastor, a reverend, or a priest, it's almost like that type of a thing. It's a calling. So you have to genuinely like it. It may not have to be in your blood, but it has to be something that you like. You have a deep fondness for, because there are days that, not even just days, weeks, months, years, that it will test you. And it does take some time to reach a point of comfort. Yeah. So that's the advice that I would give.
Okay, thank you so much for that, because sometimes I just be under the impression that some persons, they go into the jobs and they're looking at the figures and saying, okay, I'm going to do it just for this. But then some days you're going to get frustrated, you're going to get paranoid, and then you're going to up and quit. So you got to do what you love, or do something that you're interested in. As I say, you do what you love, you wouldn't work the day or the weeks, or however they put it. I can't remember the code exactly, but I think it's around that. So yeah, thank you so much for that. But before we go, I have one question I'd like to ask. How long did it take you to be versed in a programming language?
Oh, so a programming language. Well, first of all, you literally have to approach it like you are learning another language, so you have to practice it. But also that's why I said for me, it was actually difficult learning Scratch, because Scratch literally was a different programming language. You see, with Scratch now, when people start with Scratch now, for example, what is as a coding language, they start being able to see the concepts. Very different than when I learned it in text. In text, yes, you might see the concepts, but with Scratch, it is a little easier. It's a bit more condensed, right? It's in a simpler form, right? So Scratch is basically almost as though I took Pascal or Python and I put it in a form that I can teach, let's say, an early childhood group, right? Think about the colors in Scratch, think about the simple language and so on, the ease of dragging and dropping and moving things, the sounds of when something clicks in Scratch, right? When you connect blocks or you remove blocks, you delete blocks, you hear a whoosh, right? Very, very different. So when you're learning a new programming language, or you're learning a programming language, you have to approach it as though you're learning a new language. Python Python and is it C were the latest languages that I learned, right? Python, I started in the end of 2020 or the end of 2021. No, I started at the end of 2020, and I actually just gave it to another student. I think it's either called Programming for Everybody by Professor Severance from University of Michigan, or it's called Python for Everybody. One of those two. It's a specialization, about 5 or 6 courses. And this is the process that I went through, but I was working at the time, so I was a bit busy. I would get up in the morning and, well, my plan for the year was to do 1 course a month, right? Complete a course a month. Sometimes it took that, sometimes it took 1.5. And so every day, early in the morning, this is every single day, I would, for about an hour, something, often more, because when you reach a problem you can't solve, it tends to irritate you and it pulls you in. But every morning I would spend about an hour or more, just going through the course, right? Just going through that online course from Coursera. Because you basically had to indoctrinate yourself in this thing, right? And I don't know, I guess persons who have the type of brain that they find it easy to remember things, whether they use it or not. Well, for them it may be easier, but for someone like me, consistency is key. And I think consistency would be key for anyone, I guess, generally. And so that's literally what it took. The same thing with Scratch. I did the course University of Uruguay. Yeah. It's called Code Yourself, another Coursera course. Same thing, every morning for an hour, right? And that's how I learned Scratch, because I even though I knew how to code, I learned Scratch because I wanted to know how powerful it was and how to teach it to others. So I had to learn it in a bit more in-depth way, right? To learn what it was capable of and what I could do with it. Python, the same thing, right? And now what I'll say is, once you learn one programming language, right, you've learned them all. Let me put it even more succinctly than that. It's not that you have actually learned the syntax of every other programming language, but the syntax generally doesn't change. You'll find every programming language you have variables, every programming language you have loops, whether it's Scratch's repeat, whether it's whether it's forever, and repeat for a certain amount of time is just a for loop, right? So, and forever is just a while loop, right? And so what you realize is, oh, no matter language what you're going to, these particular programming structures always exist. Like Python has a few more types of structures, like dictionaries and lists and stuff like that, which make it nice and easy, it's user-friendly, etc. They have some libraries and so on, extensions, etc. But the general, or rather the core programming structures for different languages, just generally, in my opinion, it never changes. And so if, let's say, you've learned one programming language, you can catch on to another one quickly, right? Because even when you're going from a language like Scratch to Python, you realize, okay, Python has a different syntax. It's not drag and drop, you're typing, but you're still seeing that for loop, you're still seeing that while loop, you're still seeing variables, you're still seeing conditions, if, then, this, that, right? You're still seeing all of that. You're still seeing event-driven programming. Maybe now you have object-oriented programming, but in Scratch, that's just a custom block, right? So yeah, so that's what I would say about learning programming language. And don't be frightened for it. Just get into it and stick with it, and do like a couple of different projects with it. What I usually do is I'll buy a book, and I'll buy a book on the topic. With Python, I didn't, but with Scratch, I did. I bought books on the topic, and I practiced, for example, the core elements in the book, like games, making games in Scratch. I have a book on making games with Python. Why? Because if I'm going to teach that, the easiest way to teach it is through games to students, because they don't actually know how hard Python can be, and I want to make it seem easy. So to make it seem easy, I need to know it so well and in a way that is like, okay, they're going to be excited about games, but how do I get them into, how do I, so basically, and this might sound horrible, like a drug dealer, how do I give them a taste without scaring them away? Get it? It sounds horrible, but it's literally what it is. How do I get them to, how do I hit them with the coding bug? How do I bite them with that? Not literally, so that then their curiosity takes over, and I don't have to do any more work on it. I do, but just in a different way. What will happen is then they'll delve into it themselves, and then they'll be bugging me all the time. Well, how do I do this? And where do I find this? Those are the types of questions I like to get. All types of hours, right? But that's how I would say someone can get into programming, and how in terms of the ease of learning it.
Yes, I've gathered that it's all about concept and persons, applying themselves to the situation. So yes. Well, this brings us to the end of our STEMI episode, and we'd like to thank Mr. Jelani Payne for sharing your time with us today. I thought that, our conversations today was very fruitful, and I hope that our viewers, they're able to, grasp and learn, a thing or two from, what we would have spoke about today. So I'd just like to encourage our viewers to be sure to follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, on the name at stemmy.conversations. Our major broadcasting sites are Anchor, Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, and Digicells Go Loud at STEMmy Conversations. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and do have a great day.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Thank you.